Hey everybody, welcome back. There was another kind of relatively important topic I wanted to talk about in this video. I wanted to talk about hyperactivity. Hyperactivity, I kind of decided to isolate it as a separate topic for, kind of a variety of reasons. Hyperactivity can be kind of a general feeling that really everybody gets from time to time. Like if they've had a lot of caffeine or sugar, or you just maybe have some days where you feel like you have more energy than on other days. But for other people, hyperactivity can be part of a mental disorder. Like it can be very common in manic episodes of bipolar disorder. It is very common in diseases such as ADHD. It can also be present in certain maybe personality disorders, or even kind of if somebody has substance use and they use stimulants, the stimulants can cause periods of hyperactivity also. I think that's kind of one of those things, hyperactivity. I don't know if people think about it all that often unless they maybe experience it. Because I think for most people, it's usually on a pretty manageable level. Like, you have more energy and maybe you use it to be productive and like exercise, go for a walk, or maybe you get more things done at work with that kind of energy. And then there can be times where if you have a lot of energy a lot, that sometimes it can kind of manifest itself in other ways. Like, especially if we're going to talk about like mania and bipolar disorder, having the excess energy can present itself as psychomotor agitation. So like when somebody's like sitting at their desk, they can still be really fidgety because they have all this pent up energy that they feel needs released. Sometimes it can affect things like their libido, like their sex drive. It can affect their ability to sleep. They may not be able to sleep for very long periods, and they may not even be able to sleep at all for sometimes even several hours or a couple days. Obviously, with bipolar and with mania, it tends to be much longer. But if we're just talking about hyperactivity as a whole, that can affect with things like sleep. And then, of course, if you're not getting a lot of sleep, then that can cause other problems, especially in diseases like bipolar, which are the manic episodes tend to really kind of onset when you don't have a lot of sleep. And then, of course, if you're so hyperactive that you can't sit still, really a lot of times, like if you have more complicated disorder like ADHD, where they tend to have fairly high levels of energy a lot, and usually sleep is a pretty big issue for them also. If you're constantly high energy, it can be very hard to focus at work. It can be very difficult to kind of really just go about your day and kind of like have not only just kind of a more like kind of even amount of energy like everybody else, but that amount of energy can be kind of overwhelming to some people if they're not really used to being somebody who's kind of hyped up all the time, and that can make people feel very isolated. They can make them feel like they're not trying to get themselves, like if it's causing issue at places like their job, they're not trying to get themselves in trouble. It's just sometimes people have more energy than others, or even if you have somebody, or maybe it just happens from time to time, like not very often, but maybe they had a little too much caffeine and it really kind of got them in trouble with not being able to sit still or get a lot done at work. That can be pretty embarrassing for that person. So it's easy to see how higher levels of energy you may not normally think too much about, but how in various circumstances it can have an impact on your life, your productivity, your sleep. Those things tend to add up fairly quickly. So if having a lot of pent up energy, having some hyperactivity, if that's kind of a more regular thing for you, then what are some things that you can do to kind of help ease that? One of the things I have found most helpful with having a lot of excess energy is having an outlet for that energy, which that may not be the solution altogether, but it may help kind of, if you find something to channel that energy into, you can find a way to make that energy more useful in another area of your life. That way, if you're really not getting your energy out throughout the day, things like exercising can be very helpful, which I believe I think I mentioned in another video, but that can be a little hard to kind of sometimes fit exercise into your routine. But even just from exercising alone, I mean, you don't always have to do maybe anything too ridiculously physical. I mean, you can channel energy into things like writing, like a journal, or if you're somebody who likes to write stories, kind of get creative with like artwork and everything. That can be a very good outlet for somebody who has a lot of energy. Or even kind of joining some groups on Facebook can kind of help you, like if things you like to talk about, or if you just have a lot of things on your mind. Sometimes when people have pent up energy, it can be physical, like they can be hyperactive, but it can also be pent up, like people can have pent up mental energy too. Like if they have a lot on their mind that's causing them anxiety, that can be nervous energy. So I think one of the things with hyperactivity is that people tend to look at it and think that it's only like having too much sugar or caffeine, or oftentimes like if it's mental illness related, they tend to think of it more of just like, oh, energy being a good thing. But they don't really tend to think about nervous energy so much, like when somebody has anxiety. And having hyperactivity and having anxiety can also look very similar too. Sometimes you can have a lot of pent up energy, and you can't always tell if it's good energy that's more productive, if it's more negative energy. Kind of like the difference between feeling euphoric and feeling dysphoric, where if you don't always know what you're looking at, they can look relatively similar. And in diseases like bipolar disorder, mania has a lot of really profound energy. Again, people tend to think it's positive, but you can have euphoric or dysphoric mania, just like you can also have anxiety. And if you're talking about having mania where maybe it's more dysphoric versus somebody having mania, those two can get mixed up very easily with some of their symptoms, because the rapid speech is a very common component of that. But people also tend to talk faster when they're anxious too. So that can be one thing that gets mixed up fairly easily. And that can also fit with the just hyperactivity aspect of, like, even if we're not talking about bipolar disorder, that if somebody has a lot of energy, you may think that the typical person who's hyped up may just kind of be, I don't know, just kind of running laps around just wherever they're at, or that they might just be jumping around and being all kind of like bouncing off the walls kind of hyper. But you can have somebody with pent up energy who's more talkative than normal, or they have so many thoughts going in their mind at once. The body's a system. Very, very fascinating one at that, but it's kind of interesting to think how physical and mental symptoms can really overlap more than you would think. How if something's going on with your mind or even any other part of your body, the other parts of it that you wouldn't think of, like other organs, can be affected that you would never even think are related, but they could be more than you think. Okay, so going back to coping with hyperactivity. As I mentioned before, things like a high sugar intake or drinking large amounts of caffeine can be a trigger for some people to experience hyperactivity, or if you have bipolar disorder, it can even be a trigger for mania as well. So one of the things that you may be more inclined to do in order to help with this is that some people need caffeine more than others, some people don't need very much. But if you're somebody who needs some caffeine, you probably aren't going to want to cut back on it altogether, but really kind of limiting the amount of caffeine that you do intake can be more crucial for somebody who's prone to being really hyperactive after only having a small amount of caffeine or sugar. And sugar can be a little harder to intake as well, but again, some people are more sensitive to that stuff than others. And it can also depend on types of sugar that you have, like if you're talking about like carbs, for example, like candy, soda. It's all stuff that's going to sugar you up pretty quickly, and while soda, at least not all of it, but some of it has caffeine as well, so if you mix those two together, you got the perfect storm and having too much energy. So having to limit or just kind of monitor how much of those things you're consuming can also play a part in whether or not, I mean, again, some people are hyperactive in general, but if that's something that can be a trigger for being hyperactive, that it can be wise to cut back on some of that and see if that's more helpful, to see if there's any changes with that. And another big one also being, like I mentioned previously, sleep is also a very big component with your energy levels, and that can work the other way as well. Like, I mean, you can also be tired a lot if you're not getting enough sleep. But yeah, your sleep patterns can say a lot as well. Your body may be trying to overcompensate for not enough sleep, or if maybe you're not getting enough sleep and you're compensating by drinking more caffeine or taking more sugar, and then that's kind of getting you all sugared up. You can see how that's kind of a vicious cycle. And then things like hydration as well. A lot of people don't actually think about hydration in terms of energy levels. I don't know so much about hyperactive standpoint, but being chronically dehydrated can make you actually very, very drowsy, very tired. So that can be something to think about as well. That, okay, if you're hyperactive, I don't know if it's so much being dehydrated, but really being sure drinking enough water, getting enough fluids is a very important component in really a lot of your life, more so than people realize. So that can be something to keep in your mind, that if you're not entirely sure, you know, if you're not always the best on getting enough fluids, that might be something to take a second look at, just to kind of eliminate all possibilities. Nutrition can be another one. I mean, I know we mentioned sugar and caffeine already, but carbs as a whole can affect your energy levels, and not only just from an immediate standpoint, but also throughout the day. Your body, if you're only getting a certain amount of nutrients on a regular basis, if you're really primarily eating carbs and you're not eating a lot of protein or other things that are good for your body, that can also play a part on how your body metabolizes food and how you intake nutrients. And things like protein can keep you full longer, and really a lot more energy. Sometimes that can be something that if you're just so busy all the time, just go to work, do this, do that, it's harder to get good meals in. It's harder to have time to cook. Or even if you just need a quick snack real quick, you might be more inclined to grab something like a candy bar versus something like carrot sticks, where clearly one is much more healthier than the other. So if you start taking a look at some of your dietary habits, they can kind of say a lot about why you might have too much, like if you're feeling too hyped up all the time, or if your energy is even maybe plummeting at the end of the day, because maybe the first half of the day you really have a lot of energy and you're doing pretty well, but then by the second half of the day you're really just crashing from all that caffeine and sugar. It really just becomes a vicious cycle very quickly, and sometimes you don't always think about it until it's something that's more chronic, and it's really kind of causing issues over a more long-term, like, kind of situation, like, period of time. So yeah, and then one of the things that can also play a part towards the end of the day is that, like, it's good to have an outlet like hobbies and everything, but if you do decide to do something like read books, really try to limit your exposure to bright screens and bright lights, because those can be a lot more overstimulating and overbearing than people think they are. So if not having enough energy is an issue because you're not getting enough sleep, and hence the caffeine intake and kind of other substitutes keep you going that might hype you up too much. If you're wanting to get more sleep at the end of the day, you're not going to want to have this big old bright light in your face, because then that's going to be overstimulating to the rest of your body. And if you've been reading for like an hour or two and then you just try to turn right around and go to sleep, well, your body's going to be wide awake from that bright light that it was exposed to for the last hour or so, and it can take longer to fall asleep after that than you might initially think. So yeah, definitely wanting to pay attention to things like that they seem like a good idea until they start affecting your sleep patterns. So yeah, it can be very, very frustrating, very aggravating when you try to function in your day-to-day life, and you have a lot of energy and you mean well and you try to be really productive and helpful, but then if you have more energy than the people around you, it can become pretty overbearing pretty quickly, and then you feel very isolated because you feel like you have to keep like monitoring your energy, kind of taking it down a notch so that you're not overwhelming the people around you. So just know that it's okay if you have days where you have more energy and you feel more productive, but just also know that there can be too much of a good thing, And that finding ways to channel that energy can be just as important as keeping yourself healthy so that you don't have too many energy spikes as a result of like sleep deprivation or dehydration or anything. Because if you have things going on with your body, like if you're dehydrated or if you're sleep deprived, you don't want to try to mask that with caffeine. You don't want to overdo it because your body can only take so much, just like only you can handle so much sometimes, like when you get stressed out or sick or anything like that. So just really try to pay attention to what's going on with your body, and if you start noticing anything, try to see if there's maybe certain things that could maybe some tweaking to see if that causes any improvements or not. So just something I wanted to think about for this video, but until next time, have a great day, guys.